Well, thanks everyone. I think it's time, so we can go ahead and get started. It is lovely to be here with all of you today for Zero Waste Strategies for Construction and Demolition. We've got a fantastic panel here today, and I am excited to be here as your moderator. You can go to the next slide. My name is Celeste McMickle, and I am the Director for True Certification with the USGBC. You have heard from a couple of my other colleagues today, and you're going to be hearing from another one of my colleagues on our panel. My background is in architecture, and I've been working in recycling and zero waste issues for many years now, and I am thrilled to be here to help facilitate this fantastic conversation. Next slide. First, we're going to be hearing from Holly Griffith, who is my colleague and also our certification program manager for True Certification, also at the USGBC. Holly obtained her master's in environmental management and policy at Lund University in Sweden, where she researched the intersection between internal and external barriers that prevent dynamic systems change in the materials management sphere, and also has been a materials management professional based in Seattle. You can go to the next slide. Welcome, Holly. And then next up, we're going to have Patty Lloyd, who is the Director of Sustainability at Leopardo Companies. Patty has almost 20 years in the construction industry and more than 15 years of experience advancing sustainability in the built environment. She is an advocate for green building and healthy, high-performing construction, both within her firm and the industry at large. She is a construction professional fluent in sustainability and provides direction to owners, colleagues, and subcontractors in planning and executing healthy, high-performance projects. Welcome, Patty. And then next we have Adriana Velasquez. Adriana is a licensed professional engineer in British Columbia and is a senior project engineer at Metro Vancouver Solid Waste Services. She works collaboratively with jurisdictions and industry stakeholders on programs and policies to reduce, reuse, and recycle waste with the goal of decreasing waste generation and reaching regional diversion targets. And I just think we have such a great panel here today. And so I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Holly to kick things off. Thank you, Holly.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the introduction, Celeste, and hello all. I'm here today to talk about True Certification, which we recently adapted into a pilot guidance to support construction projects. So to kick us off, in just a moment, I'm going to walk through what True is, then dive into the specifics of the pilot, such as what it looks like and how projects can mobilize it to pursue their zero waste goals for construction. Next slide, please. But before all that, let's start with the problem. It's a tale as old as time. Everyone here is deeply acquainted with it. We know waste is a problem. In 2018, based on the EPA's most recent national study, the United States alone diverted only 38% of 292 million tons of material. And of course, based on standard composition, we can assume a good deal of that material was not sent to its highest and best use. Next slide, please. Landfilling is often one of our most common current strategies for materials management, but we of course know that landfills are one of the largest generators of greenhouse gas. And a recent study published by the NIH shows us that 1/3 of people living near landfills have respiratory issues. Living near landfills literally makes people sick. Next slide. So we have a huge problem, which we've known about for a good deal of time. But more recently, we're starting to see the world start to take notice too. It's signaling it cares about waste. Earlier this year at the UN Environmental Assembly in Kenya, over 200 countries developed a treaty to end plastic pollution. And just a few months ago, the US Department of Interior announced in an order to phase out single-use plastics at national parks. Even in advance of policy, we're seeing many companies, universities, and organizations cutting plastic use by focusing more on upstream strategies rather than a dependence on recycling. So the problem and the demand are both there, and we're perfectly poised. Oh, next slide, please. And we're perfectly poised to develop solutions to move us towards a more sustainable circular economy when it comes to our materials management practices. True was built to do just that. TRUE was developed as a leadership standard to recognize individual facilities that have defined and achieved their zero waste goals, as well as to act as a roadmap for facilities that are reaching towards improving their zero waste practices. It's our goal to foster a more circular economy in which all resources are valued for their highest and best use. Next slide. So far, we've had success at this goal. Compared to the US average 38% diversion, over the past 4 years, TRUE facilities have diverted an average of over 96% of their generated material. In straight numbers on the next slide, that is 3.4 million tons of diverted material over 4 years that have been managed outside of the landfill, incineration, or discharged into the environment. So while we, of course, still have a very, very long way to go, we're seeing a high value for facilities that work with TRUE. To date, TRUE has 493 projects participating in the program, of which 59% have achieved certification or pre-certification. For those unfamiliar with pre-certification, this program is designed to recognize the progress of projects working towards TRUE certification that have achieved some key credits in the certification. So, using this value statement, our intended impacts, and our growing reach, let's now turn our attention to how this will be mobilized to support construction. Construction and demolition is one of the most wasteful industries. As of 2018, C&D waste accounted for 600 million tons of material generated in the US alone, with 145 million of those tons going to landfill. Within that 145 million tons lies a significant opportunity to decrease waste and direct more material towards its highest and best use. Once again, we have a problem. We're generating a high volume of material and not diverting enough of it. And we need additional tools in place that can help support the reduction of cradle to grave management of material in this space. Certification is one of those tools. Over the years, our community has identified this same need. Most recently, this was done by Genesis Marina, a 570,000 square foot commercial office and laboratory project that general contractor Webcor is delivering in Brisbane, California. This is the first TRUE pre-certified construction site. This project, alongside a couple of others, worked to adapt TRUE certification to fit their project prior to the pilot because they saw the need for dynamic zero waste in a construction setting. But as these projects started their work, we were hearing the same thing from these teams. It was difficult to apply the standard TRUE rating system to these projects without some adaptation, particularly because TRUE is designed for existing facilities with ongoing operations, and construction projects are often new and term limited. Based on this feedback and our understanding of impact, TRUE saw a significant need to build something different to support zero waste in the construction sphere. There were 3 key impacts we homed in on that we can help provide support in. 1, zero waste is needed at construction sites, and we can help provide a guideline for developers, architects, general contractors, and subcontractors to foster zero waste policies, practices, and strategies at their place of work. 2, certification and the development of sector-specific adaptations can help increase the impact of zero waste practices at a wider scale. Having an achievement to shoot for and a way to reach it within the context of a specific industry can help more complex projects mobilize to improve their zero waste actions. And finally, 3, we know there are construction teams doing really excellent work in the realm of zero waste, and certification can act as a recognition of this excellence, helping project teams showcase their successes. For these reasons, GBCI decided to work to expand its offerings to construction facilities. And in summer of this year, we released the TRUE for Construction Projects Pilot, an adaptation of the existing TRUE rating system designed to certify new construction and major renovation projects. Through the pilot program, participating projects will be evaluating their zero waste practices using the pilot guidance based on the current TRUE version 1 rating system. By engaging with the pilot guidance, projects can ultimately earn TRUE certification for their actions and leadership and share feedback on how we can improve along the way. This pilot will greatly inform the further refinement of a TRUE adaptation for construction projects. So with that introduction, we can then ask, what does TRUE for construction look like? Well, first, of course, we need to ask what makes a TRUE project? What do we need to make sure that we can certify folks? Well, First, we need to make sure we're certifying the full construction project. So we ask that projects provide their data from the day construction begins all the way up to the day that occupancy is achieved. This way we can make sure we're really able to say, yes, the full construction project is meeting true zero waste targets. Then we want to make sure that everything generated on site and all activities happening on site are reported, be it from the construction itself, the trailer, food waste from employees. If it happens on site, we want to hear about it. This can help projects really understand the full picture of what's happening on site. As we know, zero waste means all waste. You can't pick and choose. So we really push projects to understand what they're generating, where it's going, and how they can do better. Once those basics are covered, the first thing that really makes true an accomplishment to achieve is our minimum program requirements on the screen here. These are all kind of prerequisites that we require projects to meet in order to achieve true. One particular note is second on the list here. We require an average 90% or greater diversion over the entirety of the construction project in order to be true certified. We wanted to create a certification that was achievable, but really pushed project teams to reach for excellence in zero waste. One of the things that makes True unique is that we don't just prioritize recycling and compost as forms of diversion. We also ask project teams to measure their reuse and reduction practices. We want to get a full picture of what projects are doing to reach that zero waste finish line all the way up the zero waste hierarchy. Now, to a lot of projects, 90% may feel pretty daunting. It can be a really big ask, especially when you're just getting started, which is why we have a robust set of credits to help act as a roadmap for how to get there. Here's a quick overview of all of our credit categories. You can see the categories on the right, the number of credits in each category is in the circle on the left. The way that True works is that a project team applies for however many credits are relevant to their project. And once they achieve a certain number of credits, they are considered certified under different certification levels, silver, gold, et cetera, et cetera. For example, project teams that achieve 31 credits are certified at our base level, and those that achieve 38 are certified at silver. To dig even deeper, let's delve into one of the categories, reduce, for reference. Here's a quick list, here's a quick list of the 5 credits a project could achieve under this category, depending on what they decide to prioritize. Some of these may be a better fit for the construction site itself, like documenting all materials reduced by commodity, while others may be more suited to a trailer on site, like setting printers to duplex printing. We want to represent the full site, so the adaptation was guided by that intent. At its core, this category is about supporting overall reduction activities at the facility, which can feed into diversion reporting as well. Let's look at an example. Some of True is designed around the implementation of actions. Some is geared towards expanding on-site knowledge of waste practices overall. This is why we refer to it so frequently as a roadmap. We want to enable project teams to really the waste truck is excited outside. We want to enable project teams to really understand the total generation so they can best mobilize strategies for holistic zero waste. So Reduce Credit 2 is about tracking the material flows on site and really understanding where reduction opportunities can be found. This can lead to the identification of opportunities for reduction. On the right, you can see an example of hydration stations introduced by Webcore to reduce plastic bottle consumption. Or maybe it's identified that panelization is a strong design strategy to reduce waste. Or maybe reuse opportunities are identified through pallet and shipping container reuse, all of which may meet other True credit requirements and can be reported as part of diversion through the reduction and reuse reporting sections. In this way, True credits can feed off of one another to help project teams build towards a holistic zero waste system. For example, a project team might start with focus on Recycle Credit 1, which asks them to review all materials generated on site and assess if they're meeting their highest and best use. Maybe as part of that, they conduct a zero waste audit to assess what's really going where and if that's the best end use for that material. During that process, the site may identify, actually, we had a lot of non-recyclable packaging that could be made of better materials or eliminated altogether. Well, this might address Upstream Management Credit 1, which asks sites to work with their vendors to eliminate their Goodness gracious, sorry folks, which works with vendors to eliminate their non-recyclable packaging. Maybe the team decides to work with their vendor to have materials wrapped in metal bands rather than pallet wrap like Webcor did, or maybe reusable pallets are implemented. Whatever it is, this can all be reported as diversion in Zero Waste Reporting Credit 1. As long as those materials are being diverted, they feed into that overall diversion number, which is why for construction, reduction and reuse are so key. On the whole, TRUE is designed to support those linking chains, the building of best practices and strategies to create a facility or project that is taking on zero waste at all levels. It's our intent to now focus this pilot to support that goal in a construction context. Now, to wrap us up, if you're interested in learning more, like I mentioned earlier, we have a few different resources put together for you. So let's talk about where you can get involved. We have 3 primary places you can look to learn more. First is our pilot resources platform, which contains any resources to support the pilot, as well as updates and guidance on the process. This is the best place to look to see how things develop and answers to frequently asked questions as they arise. So we encourage anyone that's interested in the pilot to check this page and look at it frequently to see developments as they're made. Our second resource is our webinar. Goodness gracious. Our second resource is our webinar detailing the pilot more comprehensively. And the third is an article on our webpage, which provide a little more detail and overview on the development of the process over time. I'll share those links in a chat once I've done today. Finally, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at true@gbci.org. We're always really excited to talk about this process, so please drop us a line if you'd like to learn more. With that, I'm delighted to pass to our next speaker. Thank you all so much for your attention. I really appreciate you joining us today.
Hi, everybody. As Celeste introduced us earlier, I'm Patty Lloyd, Director of Sustainability at Leopardo. We're a general contractor that is based in the Chicagoland area with offices in Chicago, Hoffman Estates, and we've got projects all over the country. So we've not been on a true zero waste project yet, but I really hope that we are in the near future. And today I'm going to talk about some of our waste strategies and an issue in the construction demolition debris industry that is really important. So you can see here, there's no such thing as waste, only resources in the wrong place. Next slide, please. So we've got a real linear economy going in the construction and built environment. It's one of the only industries where there's not a true like secondary market for materials. So we have our resource extraction. The construction industry is responsible for 30% of the extraction of natural resources globally. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation says that the construction industry is the biggest user of resources globally. Just to extract resources takes a tremendous amount of energy, and then we're using more materials or energy to manufacture and build. So the construction sector is one of the largest users of energy, responsible for 38% of energy related CO2 emissions. That's the construction plus building operations. And then waste generation and management, 600 million tons of C&D waste were generated in the US in 2018. And for comparison, only 292.4, I mean, that's still a lot, million tons of municipal waste. So you can see the mass of construction and demolition waste compared to municipal waste. It's a pretty big delta. Next slide, please. Which means we have a tremendous opportunity. So construction is only going to increase between now and 2060 across the world. The equivalent of the city of Paris will be built every week. There's some other great metrics around this too. Just in the next 3 years, annual construction waste is expected to reach 2.2 billion tons globally. So what are we going to do with all those resources? Next slide, please. So Annually, construction projects are dumping a lot of waste into the landfills. And a lot of that is equivalent to 30% of the waste of all the building materials used to build the buildings. So even on site, we're having a tremendous amount of waste. There's a lot of materials being created that are not reaching their full value on the job site. Next slide, please. So there's challenges to zero waste projects or really high diversion projects. To truly get to zero waste, you have to, if you have demolition involved, you have to have deconstruction processes. And there's often not enough time in the construction schedule or enough money to selectively demolish and capture value. In the reuse market, particularly for commercial construction, there's not enough stability to make sure that the materials are there when they're needed. I call it the design to build gap. So the architect looks at the project, they specify a reused material, the contractor gets awarded, 8 months later, and that particular material is no longer in that reuse retailer's possession. So that's just one example of the problem. And then inundation of certain commodities and lack thereof of others. So a lot of these resellers are set up for the residential market. And so they can't take 2,000 ceiling tiles from me. And so this creates some challenges with commercial construction. But there's real reasons why commercial construction needs to be addressed, because the waste stream from commercial construction and demolition is so much greater than that from residential. And then one of the things I'm going to talk about a lot today is building material reuse. And with that subject, there are quality warranty issues. There's hazardous unknown. One of the greatest barriers to deconstruction and building material use is cheap landfill costs. So they make it hard for owners to make the right decision because the cost to throw away is so cheap. Manufacturer take-back programs are challenging. They often have a minimum quantity that the contractor has to provide. So if you have a small project and a hard to recycle product like carpet tile, you might not be able to get into a manufacturer take-back program. So there's groups working to try to create aggregate programs for contractors. And design for disassembly is wonderful, but the buildings that we are taking down now were not designed with those principles. And so how are we addressing what's being taken apart now? And then just another challenge, there are tremendous regional variations in recycling and diversion options. This conference is in California, which has some pretty great recycling infrastructure. I'm in the Chicago area, we also do, but there are a lot of parts of the country that do not have great recycling infrastructure or reuse infrastructure. Next slide, please. So the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is one of many groups that have done a tremendous amount of work on the circular economy and construction. And there's 3 impactful circular economy strategies that I'd like to share that are specific to the built environment. So making better use of existing materials, designing spaces in ways that eliminate waste, and reusing and recycling materials. So by applying circular economy principles to buildings and construction, sharing buildings more, reusing and recycling construction materials, we can reduce the emissions from construction materials by 38% by 2050. And that's an enormous impact that we have the potential to make. Next slide, please. So this poster was done by Andrew Ellsworth. He's with Doors Unhinged in Pittsburgh. He's one of a few, I think he's kind of a one and only person that is actually salvaging materials in the commercial market and then reselling them back to the commercial market. But what Andrew found out through his research is that there's a huge high churn issue in the tenant interiors market specifically. And that market is where you have, office buildings and so forth, and the lease is turning over every 5 years. And those people are coming in and putting in new carpet, new ceiling tile, just complete new finishes. And so it creates a tremendous amount of waste, and it's very cyclical. So there's tremendous opportunity to practice materials reuse strategies and salvaging those resources. and getting them back into the reuse stream. Because as it's been said over and over today, recycling is not the highest and best use, and reuse is typically. Next slide, please. There's another opportunity, which is surplus. I've been in construction for like 20 years and really embarrassed to say that I never recognized this as an opportunity to keep materials out of the waste stream. So surplus is materials that are left over at the end of a project. It's not the same as salvage because they were never installed. They're new. They have materials date of information on them. They're often new in box, but the amount can be significant. Most construction contracts have a requirement for attic stock, which is materials left for the client for replacement and repairs. Sometimes those are pretty significant amounts, and the owner actually doesn't have anywhere to take or to put them, and so they'll get rid of them. These materials are a great stream to go straight to these reuse retailers for sale. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of opportunity through materials recovery through deconstruction. I love this quote from the US EPA. Deconstruction is a new term to describe an old process, the selective dismantling or removal of materials from buildings prior to or instead of conventional demolition. Conventional demolition is all about clearing the space for construction in the most efficient way, both by time and by cost. And that's usually what, as a GC, we get paid to do in our contract. So really changing that paradigm from the ownership and design perspective to include more time and dollars for it. Full demolition is what I just described. You've got your soft stripping, which is getting really those easy to grab materials like furniture, fixtures, and equipment, cabinetry, architectural items. Then you've got hybrid, and sometimes that has some more labor intensive things to get out, like flooring, windows, and doors. And then full deconstruction is where you're getting everything of value and all the wood out. So just, you know, understanding that there is a spectrum of deconstruction, and any path going with the arrow is a great way to go. Next slide, please. So Build Reuse is a great organization. If you want to learn more about this, they're a national organization. And they talk about some different ways of reuse. So adaptive reuse, reusing a building, you know, the structural elements, adaptive reuse with component reuse, reusing those materials which are available on the site in your new build out or your new construction, reusing construction materials from elsewhere, from a different source, and then secondary use of non-construction materials. I have this slide on here just so that you all can note, because I think this is the right audience. Build Reuse does have a deconstruction and reuse conference annually. They just had it. It's really great. So I'd encourage you to keep that on your radar for next year. Next slide, please. But beyond the materials, there are tremendous workforce development and community benefits. Just like Holly was talking about the pollution impacts to people living near landfills, there's also benefits to reuse beyond reducing what's put in a landfill, and that's workforce development and community benefits. So this organization here, Rebuilding Exchange, they're in our area. They have a great workforce development program that's helping to get people into pre-apprenticeship training programs, and they're teaching them deconstruction skills. Creating these green collar jobs in this industry that is only going to grow is a great opportunity. Lifecycle Building Center in Atlanta has workforce development. A lot of these reuse centers have a workforce development program affiliated with them, and you can check them out. A lot of times as a GC, we have trouble with those programs because they're non-union. The solution is that the owner just hires them before the GC comes on site, so they're not under our contract. Next slide, please. So where do you find out about deconstruction? So there's some references out there. Build Reuse also has a directory on their website, a national directory of deconstruction contractor training. There's also the Intro to Deconstruction book by the Building Materials Reuse Association. You can buy that online. The Delta Institute has a deconstruction and building material reuse guide for local governments, which I've found to be incredibly useful. So that's a great resource. Next slide, please. And just to kind of, the real life pictures tell the story. So just running through this slide from the bottom left, that is 3 skids of surplus material. So when I'm talking about surplus, things that were never used, that were extras on the job, they're great candidates to go straight into the reuse stream. So we were able to donate these 3 skids of washroom accessories and toilets to a local Habitat for Humanity. The medical office recliners, those were donated to a Chicagoland nonprofit. Those came straight off one of our projects. And then the other 3 pictures, the commodes, the diffusers and the ceiling tiles, those all came off of a job that we did do demolition on. They were cleaned up and installed right back on the job. And that's a great example of a tenant interior project reusing those assets. There's no reason why they couldn't use them. The ceiling tiles that they took down would have looked exactly like the new ones. And just for record, that was 2,000 ceiling tiles. So that's a great environmental impact. Next slide, please. So all for reuse, when I was showing you the Andrew Ellsworth poster earlier, that can be found on the All for Reuse website. But this is a great tool they have here. It's called the Reuse Ecosystem Map. I can only get a small snip of it for my slide, but you can go down, pick one of those buttons, and it's going to connect you to where can you donate reused things? Where can you get reused things? Who are the deconstruction subs in your site? What are the ordinances? Who are the haulers? So it really does help to gain knowledge of your local reuse. I mean, I thought I knew everybody in my area, and I found 2 firms on the Illinois part of the list that I was unaware of. So it's great stuff. Next slide, please. There's always a lot of documentation. So for the residential projects that are doing deconstruction, these there's a tax benefit. I mean, there's a tax benefit for everyone, but I've found that it's more meaningful to the residential clients than it is to the commercial ones, where they can get a tax deduction for donating usable materials to a nonprofit. These are just from one of my projects where I'm going to show you my waste breakdown in a few seconds, where we had a 96% diversion from the landfill. We donated ceiling tiles for reuse. One of the subs took the doors and then refinished them and used them on another project. We ended up milling the asphalt parking lot. So that's not reuse, that's recycling. But there was a lot of effort put into it and a lot of planning. These projects with the high waste diversion, they just don't happen without planning and integration of the project team. Next slide, please. And manufacturer take-back programs. These are 2 great commodities, both hard to recycle. So you're going to have a trouble recycling carpet tiles or ceiling tiles in your area unless you can get into a manufacturer take-back program. These carpet tiles were dirty, stained, and not feasible for reuse, but we were able to get into the SHA take-back program. I know there are websites like Building Ease, which are starting to try to put together aggregation programs so that a bunch of people could get their stuff together to meet that minimum to qualify for the program. Next slide, please. So here's just an example when I say not one path. I think we had 6 paths on this job to get to that 96% waste diversion. This wasn't a true project. I wish it would have been. I don't think the pilot was going yet, but this is a great example of just all the different organizations on one project that were engaged in hitting a high diversion and capturing all those resources, both for reuse and recycling. Next slide, please. The highest way to get diversion of all waste is through source separation. It's not always feasible, but I would be remiss not to talk about it. If you can source separate things, you reduce contamination. So this is a definite strategy for highest diversion and recapture of resources. Next slide, please. And then just, there's a lot of criteria, waste diversion, deconstruction ordinances coming around that are really going to push this industry in a very, very meaningful way. And so understanding where there are waste diversion or deconstruction ordinances. I recently spoke to a deconstruction contractor, and I said, how much has that deconstruction ordinance in your area driven your business? And she said 75% of my business is because of this deconstruction ordinance. So I thought that was a pretty meaningful metric. And then I like this quote from Eden Bruckman from the Department of Environment at San Francisco. Material reuse, rescue, and reuse epitomizes climate action for the building industry. It honors the embodied carbon by upending the prevailing linear take, make, waste pattern. And I think it's really important to point out the term climate action in that phrase, because a lot of people do not connect waste diversion and resource recovery with climate action, but it certainly is. And there's a ton of cities that have included zero waste, deconstruction, and principles like that in their climate action plans. Next slide, please. So it takes a lot of collaboration. You can't just have one passionate person. You have to have everybody on board and playing their part to make it happen. And getting to zero waste as a project, as a city, and as a nation requires all kinds of stakeholders. So this is just really a very construction-centric slide, but I think you could really apply it on a broader scale. Next slide, please. And that is all for me. We're going to turn it over to Adriana.
Thank you, Patty. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for making the time to be with us today. Again, my name is Adriana. I'm a senior project engineer with Metro Vancouver Solid Waste Services. In this presentation, I will be providing an overview of construction and demolition waste trends in the region of Metro Vancouver, and also summarize the initiatives that Metro Vancouver has in place to encourage recycling and reuse of building materials. Next slide, please. Metro Vancouver consists of 23 member jurisdictions, including 21 municipalities, 1 Treaty First Nation, and an electoral area, and is responsible for providing vital services to 2.7 million residents, which is more than half of the population of British Columbia. Our core services are drinking water, wastewater treatment, and solid waste management. In terms of solid waste, Metro Vancouver is responsible for waste reduction, recycling planning, and also the operation of a series of solid waste facilities in the region. Next slide, please. As Patty and Holly mentioned, the C&D waste is a significant issue, and that's not different in the Metro Vancouver region. According to 2020 data, about a third of the total 1.3 million tons of waste that are disposed in the Metro Vancouver region every year comes from the C&D sector. Next slide, please. In 2021, the number of residential demolitions in Metro Vancouver was higher than the previous 3 years, and it was also higher than the 10-year average. Most buildings at this point in the region are still taken down by traditional demolition methods. And as we know, this makes building materials unsuitable for reuse or recycling. In Metro Vancouver, the C&D sector experiences a high diversion rate compared to other sectors. And this is mainly due to recycling of concrete and asphalt. However, if we remove these two materials, the diversion rates lower significantly. And as we can see, there is a great opportunity to take other materials out of the garbage stream. And this is especially true for wood products. Based on the 2018 C&D waste composition study, about 60% of the total disposed C&D waste in the region are wood products, and some of them can actually be rescued at earlier stages. To encourage reuse of building materials, Metro Vancouver has been working on a set of different key initiatives, and one of them is the C&D Waste Reduction and Recycling Toolkit. Back in 2008, when we first published this toolkit, the focus was on recycling of building materials. However, with time, this has evolved, and now our focus is to encourage reuse. Through the toolkit, we collaborated with different leaders in the industry to increase awareness on the best practices for the construction and demolition sector. Next slide, please. An example of this is that we now have a section on alternatives to demolition that provide practical guidance based on the project unique needs. For example, we suggest adaptive reuse for some of the projects. This is a relatively new area for policy in Metro Vancouver. We have seen different plans that include it, such as the City of Coquitlam's Environmental Sustainability Plan, which has an action to encourage adaptive reuse of existing buildings. However, not all projects are feasible for adaptive reuse. And in those cases, maybe house moving could be an option. The City of Richmond encourages homeowners to list their house for relocation through the House Moving and Salvage program. If house moving is not feasible for the project, then either full deconstruction or partial deconstruction could be an option. The City of Vancouver introduced a deconstruction requirement for specific properties and provided funding for the establishment of a deconstruction hub to provide a central location for contractors to bring salvage materials for reuse. And also the District of North Vancouver is launching their new requirement for wood salvage from pre-1950 homes in early 2023, sorry. Even if full deconstruction is not possible, valuable items can still be recovered from a building. And the toolkit also includes 3 case studies to emphasize that these approaches are not only environmentally beneficial, but also has economic benefits. Next slide, please. Currently, 9 municipalities in Metro Vancouver have or are planning to implement some form of C&D diversion requirements. Some of them require a specific diversion rate along with a deposit and submission of compliance report with receipts, while others require contractors to fill out a material recycling checklist. To help contractors and waste management companies meet municipal C&D diversion requirements, the toolkit also includes guidance on setting up on-site recycling stations, as we can see on the right of the slide. Also provides guidance on how to manage hazardous materials commonly found in C&D sites, such as gypsum or lead, and the directory of service providers and facilities. In addition to the update of the toolkit, we have included an online tool that helps contractors and waste management companies estimate how much waste will be generated from residential projects, and also what the minimum recycling requirements set by the municipality in which the project is located. So basically, the user just needs to provide the floor area, choose the municipality, and select the units they want the displays to be presented in the tool. Also, at our recycling and waste centers, we have programs to encourage recycling and keep hazardous waste out of the landfill. Through our disposal ban program, inspectors look at incoming loads, and if they contain 5% of clean wood or any quantity of gypsum, they are issued a surcharge. And while the disposal ban program targets large loads from commercial clients, Metro Vancouver also has developed special recycling and disposal programs to support residents manage their leftover materials. So basically, anyone doing a do-it-yourself renovation can bring new gypsum cut-offs for recycling and use gypsum for safe disposal without requiring a laboratory test for asbestos to any Metro Vancouver recycling and waste center. Again, we know there's more that needs to be done, and we want to move building materials up the waste hierarchy. And while markets for materials is a key challenge for construction and demolition materials. And to tackle this front, Metro Vancouver continues to do research on how these markets can be expanded. Through the UBC Sustainability Scholars Program, Metro Vancouver carried out 2 research projects for salvage and reuse in the built environment. The first one in 2019 evaluated the effectiveness of online marketplaces to promote reuse of building materials. And last year, the study explored options to divert building materials commonly found in single-family homes built after 1970 in the region. And you can find these studies under the project library section of the Sustainability Scholars Program. I'm happy to share the link if that's of interest. A recent report by the Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions found reuse of existing building stock is almost always more effective in reducing climate impacts than new energy efficient construction. Metro Vancouver has already incorporated reuse in our toolkit in line with these findings. And in addition to that, we are working on our circular economy and 3R study, which will include a look at some global and local initiatives that we might consider as we update our solid waste management plan. And last but not least, Metro Vancouver founded the National Zero Waste Council to support Canada's transition to a circular economy by bringing together governments, businesses, and NGOs to advance waste prevention initiatives. Some recent C&D projects undertaken by the Council include recycled asphalt pavement toolkit and also a wood waste pilot. The recycled asphalt pavement toolkit is based on the results of a pilot of 40% recycled asphalt that was laid in the city of Richmond in 2020. The online toolkit provides information and also resources to encourage other asphalt producers and buyers to take up similar projects in their own jurisdictions. Again, this toolkit has lots of very useful information, includes technical assessment framework that Richmond used to assess the RAP project. Next slide, please. And well, as we mentioned before, wood is one of the largest waste components in Canadian landfills. And the wood waste pilot is an opportunity to assess the economic feasibility of transforming wood waste to an actual product by investigating what markets may exist and whether investment potentials exist as well. Basically, for this project, the lab will manufacture a particle board using wood waste. And this research also seeks to respond to the global shortage of engineering wood composites and understand how this model could be applied in other geographies across Canada. And well, this is a great example of multi-stakeholder collaboration, working with academia, with industry, and also with government. Next slide. And with that, I will wrap up my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention.
Everyone. That was so great. It was wonderful to hear from each of you. You had such insightful things to say and really shared fantastic information about understanding the landscape behind zero waste construction and demolition. So we really appreciate that. We have about 10 minutes for questions. We're going to wrap up a couple minutes early so that folks can migrate back over to the main stage. But hopefully we can get in at least maybe one question each, and then if there's any follow-ups, we can certainly circulate them to the speakers. So I'll maybe just go in reverse order here and just start with Adriana. So interesting to learn about everything happening in Vancouver. There was a question related to the wood waste and understanding maybe why it's such a large section of the disposal that currently exists, and if its current way of being processed is being burned or incinerated, or just to kind of understand what that current situation is.
Right. Thank you for the question. What we have heard from the industry is that there's still not enough incentive and markets for reuse for wood specifically. So it's a team effort. Governments are doing what they can in providing incentives, new bylaws, and research in academia to see what markets are appropriate for it as well. And in terms of the end use right now, some of it is reused, and like most of it is either incinerated or, unfortunately disposed of.
Great, thank you. Well, we look forward to seeing how some of these new practices are going to be integrated and improve that number. All right, now let's move to Patty. I think a question is kind of twofold here, is really to just understanding, with the surplus materials, what type of infrastructure is really needed to support that type of relationship with sales and construction projects to facilitate that transfer of materials. And then also just to kind of understand, since those materials are often very expensive, how is the cost accounted for in terms of, are they being, is the contractor being compensated for them? Is the owner being compensated for them? Like, how does that exchange work?
Yeah, for the infrastructure question, if I understood it correctly, it was like, how do we work together to reduce the amount of surplus salvage? And I think that, as contractors looking at specifications, you need to go back and say, does the owner really want 10% surplus of this item? If it's a really large project, I put a link to the San Francisco surplus study there in the chat, but there's, I think, one project they did a case study. I think they had to use a whole floor of one of their buildings to store the surplus. Nobody's really got that kind of space. Real estate is expensive. And so are construction materials, as was pointed out earlier. So maybe they'd say, no, we don't want any. And we live in an internet world where we can order on demand as we need it now. And you've reduced that surplus. Or understanding if there's amounts called for in the specification for breakage or aesthetics. Some design teams are now embracing the aesthetics as they come with the materials instead of ordering surplus to, accommodate. As far as the cost and how do we recoup those costs, I don't think that is currently part of the financial model. We give the stuff away. And we're happy to do it because A, it needs to be gone. B, we want it in reuse. And remember, every time you engage in reuse, you're avoiding a tipping fee at a landfill. So that's an important thing. But again, I think I said it earlier, the commercial clients don't really care about those tax deductions that much, though they certainly do in the residential.
Gotcha. Thank you. Okay, and then for Holly, kind of a two-part question here. We know that the True for Construction is currently under its pilot phase. So what are kind of the next steps that pilot is going to take? And as it's currently in its pilot, what type of feedback have you been getting from the industry, from the community to kind of develop what might inform those next steps?
That's a really great question. So right now we are very, very early in the pilot. So it's kind of been exciting to kind of hear from folks and see folks just really get started on engaging. So we really want to wait until we have quite a few different projects get the chance to like dig their hands into the certification and really understand like what credits are working, what credits aren't, where are things radically different from standard processes, where aren't they? So we'll be doing that feedback gathering for a good while as we get different projects engaging. Construction projects take quite a bit of time, and we are asking them to share their full duration. And so I think it'll be a while that we're kind of engaging from that standpoint. But we have gotten a lot of really good feedback in that process. So I'll hit that in just a second. But basically, the next step is that we gather all that feedback, and then we'll kind of share feedback as we go on immediate things, and then develop kind of our next, our official final is kind of the goal. We want to create something that's really solid and really good. We have gotten quite a bit of feedback from project teams around some tough materials. We've heard quite a bit about things like soil and how much of an impact soil has in the excavation phase, and how do you deal with soil when it has higher levels of contamination and may be regulated? How do we engage from that standpoint? And so there are a bunch of different kind of products in higher volumes that haven't been a part of our conversation that now really need to be. So that's been a really big piece of feedback that we're engaging with folks on. Things like the zero waste audit is a question. We typically ask for a physical zero waste audit, but much more difficult to do a physical waste audit at a construction facility. That stuff is heavy. You can't pick up rebar the same way. And so kind of working with those project teams to say, yes, we hear you. What can we do to try and make this more accessible? So a lot of the feedback we've received up to this point is excitement and enthusiasm and interest, and then kind of these nitty-gritty details of, hey, this is different, these don't quite work, let's talk about where we can go. So we're really early on, but it's just been such a fun opportunity to kind of talk to folks and hear those pain points and kind of see where we can develop moving forward. So more to come. We're really looking forward to those next steps.
Thank you. That's great. Well, we're just about at time. We were supposed to wrap up at 4:41 and it's 4:40 or 1:41 for Pacific Coast folks. So I think we'll transition over now to back to the main stage. I again just want to thank all of you for participating, to our panelists for your great presentations. Obviously, this is an area that there is a lot of room for continued work and effort, and I know that these resources are going to go a long way to continuing to transform the industry. So thank you all again. Looking forward to seeing you at the next session, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.